Take us through the latest developments is NFL insider Adam Schefter. Adam, let's start with the Cowboys. It's what everybody wants to talk about. What is the latest with them?
Well, they spent the last 2 days meeting with Brian Schottenheimer, and it doesn't seem right now like the Dallas Cowboys have begun to move yet to try to close a deal. We're waiting to see if they wind up moving ahead with Brian Schottenheimer or whether they wind up moving on from Brian Schottenheimer. That is in question, but clearly the two sides spent the last 2 days a lot of time meeting, hearing ideas for the future, and we'll see if the two sides can figure out a way to finalize some sort of deal if that's what they decide. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Saints are beginning their in-person interviews this week. Due to the storm, they couldn't do that. Mike McCarthy is scheduled to come in later next week, but they have right now the interview starting in New Orleans this week. Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, is scheduled to interview this weekend along with the Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver. We'll see how those go before they move on to Mike McCarthy. And the Jacksonville Jaguars parted ways yesterday with Trent Baalke, their general manager. There were people around the league that had reservations about coming to Jacksonville to work with Trent Baalke. I think Trent Baalke recognized he didn't want to be a drain on the organization. Both sides decided to move on their own respective ways, and now the Jaguars are in the market not just for a head coach, but for a head coach and a general manager. And so their search kicks back up again, and they have a lot of work and a lot of ground to make up. Keep in mind, last year the Washington Commanders hired Dan Quinn on February 1st. It worked out okay. So there's still time for Jacksonville, but right now they're a little bit behind the eight ball.
Yeah, a lot of people talking about the fact that they did that so late, firing Trent Baalke. But hey, like you just mentioned, they still have plenty of time to get things done. The offseason already off-seasoning. Adam Schefter, thank you for the insight.
That does not mean that they are not still interested in Liam Cohen. And I would not at all be surprised, Jenny, if the Jaguars try to make another run at Liam Cohen. A couple other names, because they have Patrick Graham in on Thursday for an interview, Robert Saleh in on Friday. They're probably going to put in second interview requests for Kellen Moore, for Joe Brady. And I also wouldn't be surprised if we hear Mike McCarthy's name maybe pop up in Jacksonville as well.
That's a fun one to toss in there as well right now. You mentioned Ben Johnson there and Aaron Glenn. They both interviewed with the team before ultimately deciding to go to the Bears and the Jets. And now speaking of the Jets, so Aaron Glenn, named the head coach there, was the Lions defensive coordinator for the past 4 seasons. This past year, Detroit finished in the top 10 in both scoring, defense, and takeaways. Just a star there. Now we turn our attention to the GM search. Are they close to finding someone, JJ?
They should be. And I don't know if that's going to happen on Thursday night. I don't know if that's going to happen on Friday morning or afternoon or evening. Look, this has been one of the longest searches in the entire NFL. The New York Jets have been, right? They fired Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas midway through the season. They get Aaron Glenn. That was the top candidate all along. They are very, very happy to have AG in the building as one of the top candidates across this entire candidate pool. Now, who's going to be the general manager? They had Lance Newmark, who's currently the Commanders' assistant GM. He was previously for about a quarter century with the Detroit Lions. They had him in on Tuesday. He was there for many, many hours. They are now on Thursday going to be interviewing Darren Muji, who is the assistant GM of the Denver Broncos. They also are going to be interviewing Trey Brown, a senior personnel executive with the Cincinnati Bengals. You'd probably call him an assistant GM with the Bengals. They don't really hand out titles there. They do things a little interestingly. So that's what we mean by senior personnel executive there in Cincinnati. I am led to believe that out of those three, Newmark, Muji, and Brown, that a general manager will be chosen from that group. We could know who their choice is on Thursday night. It may go into Friday. Look, it may even go into Saturday. The Jets have interviewed a whole bunch of people. They've had a very unique and robust search process, but it is getting toward the finish line, Jenny, for the New York Jets and their GM.
Well, whenever they do name a name, you know we'll have it right here on CBS Sports HQ. We're going to turn our attention to the Cowboys now. So we've been hearing the conversations with Brian Schottenheimer over there, that those are continuing. What is the latest for Dallas?
So the latest is, and everything that I'm hearing out of Dallas, it would now be a surprise if Brian Schottenheimer is not named the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. He interviewed on Tuesday. That went well, several hours, over 3 hours. Then on Wednesday. They continued it. Jenny, you want to call it a second interview? You want to call it a continuation of the first interview? You want to just say that they're in the talking phase? You know, I don't want to get into statuses and all sorts of things like that. Let's just say that the talks have been going well. And we see right there Brian Schottenheimer's resume, of course, the son of legendary NFL head coach Marty Schottenheimer. He's 51 years old. He's been the OC and a quarterback's coach for a number of teams, but the last 2 years, he's been with the Dallas Cowboys. Whether this should be a huge point of emphasis or not, Jerry Jones strongly believes that continuity, consistency in terms of offensive language and verbiage for Dak Prescott is going to be very important. You look at the names that they've already interviewed: Kellen Moore, Robert Saleh, Leslie Frazier, and now Brian Schottenheimer. 50% of those names are very familiar with Dak Prescott, have quite literally spoken the same offensive language. And so right now, it seems as though they are going to move toward Brian Schottenheimer. Could happen today, could happen tomorrow. It's also, Jenny, the Dallas Cowboys, and it's also Jerry Jones. And so as much as we say, it looks this way, and maybe for 31 other teams, you'd say, that's what it's going to be, it's Jerry Jones.
We can always expect a pivot there, just when we least expect it. So we'll be waiting to find out what happens. And then last but not least, we got the Raiders. So they're still looking for a head coach. Yesterday, you reported that they're hiring John Spytek as their next GM. He served as the Bucs assistant GM since the start of the 2023 season, been in the front office with Tampa Bay since 2016. Who are some of the finalists for that head coaching job?
Yeah, so Spytek is there, and let's look at this. He's a guy who has known Tom Brady going back to their overlapping years at the University of Michigan. They played together on that Wolverines team. So they go back like rocking chairs. And so now Tom Brady has his guy there at general manager. Who would John Spytek potentially be interested in? The top name that has been coming to mind that a lot of people across the NFL landscape has been saying, Pete Carroll, who we know about his resume. We know what he has been able to do most recently with the Seattle Seahawks. But you want to get a guy who can change a culture? My goodness. I mean, could you do much better than Pete Carroll? You certainly could do worse than him. We know that he's a guy who enjoys being out on the left coast, right? From USC to Seattle. And now we have this Vegas Raiders job open. You have Tom Brady at the controls, at least right now during the search process. Mark Davis is still the day-to-day operator of that team. But you get a guy, a culture builder, a culture change agent who could come in, and maybe you don't have the quarterback figured out, and they do not. And they have a draft pick that maybe they can move up and get one of the guys, or maybe they can't. But in a division like the AFC West, where you have future Hall of Fame head coach Andy Reid and potential future Hall of Fame coaches in Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh, you got to get a heavy hitter. And the Las Vegas Raiders and Tom Brady and Mark Davis, they all understand that. And so no one, I think, would be surprised if ultimately it's Pete Carroll. But things a little quiet out that way. We'll see how things continue to develop, but definitely keep an eye on Pete Carroll.
I hear Pete Carroll. I immediately think about Bill Belichick. We are going to be...
Y'all remember last season, right? The Dallas Cowboys, once the talk of the NFL, ended up leaving us fans shaking our heads. Despite Jerry Jones swaggering around with his all-in talk, we saw a 7-10 record, injuries left and right, and a roster that felt as thin as a Texas tumbleweed in July. Folks, it was tough to watch. What stung even more? Dallas spent the least on free agency. Yep, they pinched those pennies, and boy, did it show when the competition got fierce. But hold your horses, this offseason's got a whole different vibe. The Cowboys' front office is sitting on just over $100 million in cap space. That's like striking oil on your ranch. Sports insiders are buzzing that Dallas might finally break out of its frugal rut and land themselves a top-tier free agent. And the name that's making the rounds? Miami Dolphins' safety, Jevon Holland. Now, I ain't saying it's a done deal, but if this happens, it'll be a game changer. Zach Cook from Sports Grid had some thoughts on Holland. He called him the best safety on the market. And you know what? He's got a point. Holland's been consistent, bringing a dynamic energy that any defense would kill for. You put a playmaker like him in the Cowboys secondary? That's the kind of move that gets you noticed in the NFC. This isn't just about fixing a hole in the roster. It's about sending a message that Dallas is ready to stand toe-to-toe with the league's best. But let's think about it. Why's this move so important? It's not just about Holland. It's about the Cowboys' mindset. For years, we've been hollering for bold decisions, for some of that old-school Cowboys swagger to come back. Signing Holland wouldn't just be smart, it'd be a statement. A way to show the fans, the league, and maybe even themselves that they're serious about building a championship-caliber team. The NFL's a tough business, and you can't win big by playing it safe. Now, here's where y'all come in. Imagine this. Holland rocking that Cowboys star on his helmet, shutting down the NFC's top wideouts. Doesn't that make you want to grab your jersey and holler, "How about them Cowboys?" So tell me, do you think this move could finally be the spark that puts Dallas back on top? Let's hear it.